Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, March 16th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about President Joe Biden's approval rating in the state of Iowa. Now, the reason why I want to focus on this state is because it's one of the few swing states that actually didn't shift significantly relative to how it voted in the 2016 presidential election. In fact, it shifted by around just 1 percentage point relative to 2016. And looking at Joe Biden's approval rating, I did not expect it to be as high as it is today. But it looks as if these new numbers coming from a very reputable pollster. I'll show you why I trust this one and why I think it was worthy of a video, because it might be an indicator of what the national numbers mean for the overall approval rating for Joe Biden beyond the national level. So we're talking about other battleground states, other key Republican states that are possibly future swing states that could be somewhat indicated by this new poll that shows a state that was very partisan and very much in favor of Donald Trump actually putting Joe Biden in a positive light at this point in time. So first things first, why do I trust this one poll? Well, it's a poll that was done for the Des Moines Register. It's the Des Moines Register MediaCom Iowa poll, and it was conducted by Seltzer and Company. Now, the reason why this is an accurate pollster in Iowa specifically is because it is the only one that has met the mark in 2016 and 2020. In 2020, we saw the polling averages bring Donald Trump to around a 1% victory over Joe Biden on Election Day. It ultimately ended up at a point where Donald Trump won by 8.2%. So that's a 7-point swing. But almost every single poll was wrong, except for one. We saw Biden ahead by 1, even in another, Trump ahead by 2, but at the most it was a 2-point lead for either candidate, except for one poll in particular that's rated A+. This Seltzer and Company poll that showed that Donald Trump was ahead by 7 points. This was a warning sign. This poll was right on the money back in 2016, and it released the same results for 2020. Back in 2016, what did we see? Donald Trump was up 3 points on the overall averages, but that Des Moines Register poll held by Seltzer and Company put Donald Trump with a 7-point lead over Hillary Clinton, 46-39. They got that margin correctly. They were closer than any other pollster. Looking at the average, there was never even a point in time where Trump was up 9.5%, especially not in 2020, where at the most he was up 5-6 points in the state. But other than that, we had not seen an 8-point victory, especially this close to Election Day. Biden was leading a few weeks out until the presidential election. So Seltzer and Company seems to be getting this poll correctly, seems to be getting it right on the money in Iowa. And now they're telling us, the most accurate pollster in Iowa is telling us that Joe Biden is doing well in terms of approval. For a state that he lost by 8 points in 2020, he's doing okay. So here's a little bit of a background information. They found that looking at the approval rating back in September, we saw that 43% of Iowa adults had a favorable feeling about Joe Biden and 51% had an unfavorable feeling. Coincidentally, that reflects nearly what we saw in the 2020 presidential election, just off by a few percentage points. They also say 51%. Let's actually read up. The majority of Iowans hold a favorable feelings towards Joe Biden a month and a half into his term, despite the state voting to reelect former President Trump by an 8-point margin 4 months ago. 51% say they hold a very favorable or mostly favorable feelings towards him, according to the latest Des Moines Register MediaCom Iowa poll. They found that 46% hold either mostly unfavorable or very unfavorable feelings towards Joe Biden. So a difference than in September. So September was the 43-51. Now it seems to be 51-46. So a significant shift. And also in terms of the job approval rating, I'll just show you this pie chart here because it's a better representation, for the visuals at least. We see that 47% of Iowa voters approve of the job that Joe Biden is doing. Well, that's already an increase from what's happening in terms of the overall vote share, a 2.1% increase to be exact. Those who disapprove are down to 44%. Considering Donald Trump won 53% of the vote in that state, that is also a significant reduction of what we would expect. Also, in 2020, in September, we saw a difference in terms of those who had a favorable feeling about him versus now. So it looks as if Joe Biden is getting a job approval rating bump or a favorability bump as a result of this being his quote-unquote honeymoon period in the White House, where he's not really being slammed too heavily by the media because he's just now in office, can't be completely held to every single standard of his promises, give or take a couple that he promised within the first 100 days we've seen him get not bashed, but certainly critiqued on. But looking at these numbers, it's not bad. It's certainly not bad. And amongst self-identified partisans, Biden's approval rating and favorability ratings fall along party lines, as expected. 94% of Democrats have a favorable feeling of him versus 8% of Republicans. But the fact that 8% of Republicans is higher than 6% of Democrats that either refuse or have a disapproval rating of Joe Biden, I think that's okay. 91% of Democrats approve of his performance, 9% of Republicans. So the first one was just the favorable feeling, meaning how do you like him? Do you like him? Is he a nice person, a likable president? The other one is saying, how do you feel about his current role in the White House and how do you think he's doing? Independent Iowan voters go 53% approve, 44% disapprove in terms of job approval, and also in terms of just favorability rating, which is a little bit different. 49% have favorable feelings, 47% have unfavorable feelings. And then, looking at COVID-19, they ask, do you approve or disapprove Joe Biden's job of handling COVID-19 as a pandemic? Right? A 20-point deficit here. And as we had seen in previous videos, we know the Democratic Party is going to be harping on this COVID-19 relief effort that was not backed by the Republican Party after Donald Trump was elected, and they're going to use this to their advantage. And so far, it looks as if Joe Biden's numbers are improving, not because of economic recovery or not because of other things, but because of the way he's handling COVID-19 and the way he's taking it seriously, I think is something that certainly is a difference from what was done in the previous administration, and Joe Biden is receiving benefits for that. Now, looking at the COVID-19 response amongst Republicans, we can get into that. It's not really important, but just know that Republicans do support the way that Joe Biden, not as an entire party, but more Republicans approve of his COVID-19 performance than approve of him as a president, but still show some crossover support. But for Donald Trump, they also asked these voters, again, this is the most accurate pollster in Iowa. These voters just reelected him back in 2020 or voted to reelect him. Donald Trump has a 42% very unfavorability rating from the people here. And I think this largely comes from Democrats. Definitely from Democrats. 11% mostly unfavorable. That could be a combination of Democrats, independents, and potentially some Republicans that are just done with Donald Trump as being the figurehead for the GOP. Now, looking at these numbers, do I think that the state is all of a sudden a Democratic state because they approve of Joe Biden as a president and not of Donald Trump as a person? No, I don't think that at all. But I think it is important to note that this state did vote to reelect him by a pretty large amount, and now they seem to have turned on him. However, as some people say, you can't compare Biden and Trump just yet. That makes sense. There are a lot of things that need to go into it. And also, we had mentioned the favorability rating, 51% to 40. I guess this is 46%, around a 5-point difference here, which is nothing super significant. It's just a difference from the job approval numbers, but they are very similar in terms of their margin and in terms of the voters that approve versus disapprove of Joe Biden or like him as a person. So, looking at these numbers, I think that there is also some implication as to why COVID-19 relief might be driving Joe Biden to being approved of by these voters that had turned on him back in 2020. Well, first things first, Iowa's COVID-19 case count is decreasing. It's one of the states that's considered to be lowering cases and also remaining low, meaning that they had declined significantly and they are staying that way. Now, Iowa was one of the first states that was hit very hard by COVID-19. Very, very hard. It was one of the few hotspots, as we would put it, before we saw, besides New York, and before we saw Florida and other cities and other states introduced as hotspots. Iowa was one of the hardest hit states in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And now it looks as a point that they are decreasing in terms of total cases and total deaths and total hospitalizations. And while some people may attribute that, of course, with the governor here, Kim Reynolds, the majority of Iowa voters in this same poll, keep in mind this is the most accurate poll in Iowa. The majority of Iowans do not want Governor Kim Reynolds to seek re-election. Now, this was a much closer race than the presidential margin was in 2016 and 2020. In Iowa in 2018, the Democratic Party nearly captured this governorship. But it looks as if the majority of voters here say, 52% to be exact, say, I don't want Kim Reynolds to run for re-election. 41% say, I want her to run again. So 11-point deficit here. And in terms of job approval rating, 46% approve of her job approval rating, approve of the way that she's handling the office of governor, whereas 56% approved of it back in June 2020. So COVID-19 has been rampant across the country. No state is immune. No pun intended. I mean, just looking at the state itself, certainly has been hit hard by COVID-19, and while she did have an initial approval rating bump back in June 2020, the beginning of summer, we did not see that last until now. And it looks as if the COVID-19 difference in terms of the handling of the virus in certain states and on the national level is something that is actually winning over Iowa voters, because that 20-point deficit comes for a reason. The voters in this state seem to be liking what Joe Biden is doing and not liking what Kim Reynolds is doing with COVID-19. And when you look at the vaccination efforts in the state, actually, Joe Biden is being attributed for a lot of this vaccine acquirement because you've seen all of those headlines. I'm sure the headlines of Joe Biden ensures 200 million doses to the United States by May, making a promise that by May 1st, every adult will be able to sign up for the vaccine. That's a month and a half away. That's not a long amount of time. That is help now and help immediately. The COVID-19 Relief bill is also something that is propping up the Democratic Party. And these vaccines in Iowa actually are doing better than they are on the national average. With 24% of the population, that's nearly 1 in 4 people with at least one dose of the vaccine. That is very, very good. It goes above the national average, and I think that's something that positively reflects on the Democratic Party at this point in time, because I can't imagine too many Republicans are going to be flaunting the COVID-19 relief bill or flaunting the acquirement of the COVID-19 vaccines unless they were able to do it. And as many people know, now through the media, that it was a result of the Biden administration. And while some people here may not be too trusting of the mainstream media, it clearly seems that the sentiment in Iowa has turned in favor of the Democratic Party and in favor of Joe Biden. But again, like I had said, that is not to say that this state is automatically going to be considered a blue state or automatically going to be considered a state the Democratic Party will absolutely win in 2024. It just means what's happening right now clearly is working for Joe Biden. And I think that its implications of this poll go beyond the 2020 results in Iowa, but sort of seep into the way that voters might feel about Joe Biden in other states. Another state, Ohio, that votes typically with Iowa. I think the last time they broke away was in 2004, if I'm not mistaken, or 2000. Yeah, 2000, not 2004. 2000 was the last time that it broke away from each other. And, looking at the voting history here, it was decided by nearly the same exact margin. We're talking 8.1% instead of 8.2%. Very similar demographic groups here, both of them very white states. And, looking at the breakdown, I think that we could see that potentially the approval rating for Joe Biden is very similar in Ohio. And ultimately, this is telling us that the vaccine efforts and the COVID-19 discussion is really helping Joe Biden, because he went from a point back in September 2020, right after the DNC, which was the bump for Joe Biden's favorability rating amongst the American people. It was still a deficit of around 8 points in the entire state. Now it's a positive. He turned a negative into a positive after the election. That's good. That is very good for Joe Biden. And the fact that a state like Iowa, which was decided by 8 points, and keep in mind that 8 points is a large amount. States such as North Carolina and Florida were decided by less than 8 points. Texas was decided by less than 8 points. These two states were decided, by very similar margins. But many other states were decided by closer margins. I mean, realistically speaking, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Minnesota, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Texas. I think that's possibly it in terms of swing states, but what you can take away is that there's 11 states here that were decided by lesser margins in Iowa and Ohio than they voted for Donald Trump. And ultimately, now Joe Biden is being approved of here in terms of his job approval. So I think this goes to show that what's happening for Joe Biden is working. The rhetoric coming out of the White House and through the press releases are working. The statements being made is working in this state. COVID-19 seems to be a very pressing issue even amongst Republican states. And while, without COVID-19 and if Joe Biden was elected, I don't think he would be at this position where the voters here approve of his response. Obviously, there wouldn't be that question, but approve of him and his job as president. It seems as if him being in office, is still going to be a bump for him in terms of approval rating, at least compared to where he stood before the election or a few months before the election. Ultimately, Joe Biden is in a position now where he is approved of in Iowa, which I think is just news in itself. Especially the historical accuracy of this poll really goes to show that this is true. I really do trust this pollster in particular, and it tells us a lot about this state that used to be a battleground that turned away because of Donald Trump that could potentially be, especially with some of these new numbers. So final recap here. Joe Biden is approved of in Iowa. It's an indicator that he might be approved of in some other states, and that areas with similar COVID-19 situations and vaccination efforts might be approving of the way that Joe Biden is handling his job. It seems as if COVID-19 has also boosted Joe Biden's approval rating, whether here or nationwide. So altogether, I think that the pandemic ultimately helped the Democratic Party both win the election and remain popular amongst the American people, which is why COVID-19 relief is something that I think is going to be a prime issue for 2022, even if COVID-19 isn't a main one. So very interesting numbers out of Iowa. We'll be closely watching it over the next 2 years heading into the 2022 midterm elections. We might see the Democratic Party return to being the majority in the House in Iowa, or we could potentially see, a new governor come in as a result of the COVID-19 handling by some of these governors, specifically Kim Reynolds in Iowa. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.